Clusters of pots clattered and banged as the peddler's wagon rumbled over the heavy timbers of the wagon bridge. Still surrounded by a cloud of villagers and farmers come for festival, the peddler reined his horses to a stop in front of the inn. From every direction people streamed to swell the numbers around the great wagon, its wheels taller than any of the people, with their eyes fastened to the peddler above them on the wagon seat. The man on the wagon was Padan Fain, a pale, skinny fellow with gangly arms and a massive beak of a nose. Fain, always smiling and laughing as if he knew a joke that no one else knew, had driven his wagon and team into Emmons Field every spring for as long as Rand could remember. The door of the inn flew open even as the team halted in a jangle of harness, and the village council appeared, led by Master Alvir and Tam. They marched out deliberately, even Sen Bui, amid all the excited shouting of the others for pins or lace or books or a dozen other things. Reluctantly, the crowd parted to let them to the fore, everyone closing in quickly behind and never stopping their calling to the peddler. Most of all, the villagers called for news. In the eyes of the villagers, needles and tea and the like were no more than half the freight in a peddler's wagon. Every bit as important was word of outside, news of the world beyond the 2 rivers. Some peddlers simply told what they knew, throwing it out in a heap, a pile of rubbish with which they could not be bothered. Others had to have every word dragged out of them, speaking grudgingly, with a bad grace. Fain, however, spoke freely, if often teasingly, and spun out the telling, making a show to rival a gleeman. He enjoyed being the center of attention, strutting around like an undersized rooster, with every eye on him. It occurred to Rand that Fain might not be best pleased to find a real gleeman in Emmons Field. The peddler gave the council and villagers alike exactly the same attention as he fussed with tying his reins off just so, which was to say hardly any attention at all. He nodded casually at no one in particular. He smiled without speaking, and waved absently to people with whom he was particularly friendly, though his friendliness had always been of a peculiarly distant kind, backslapping without ever getting close. The demands for him to speak grew louder, but Fain waited, fiddling with small tasks about the driver's seat, for the crowd and the anticipation to reach the size he wanted. The council alone kept silent. They maintained the dignity befitting their position, but increasing clouds of pipe smoke rising above their heads showed the effort of it. "War!" Master Alvir's mouth fit awkwardly around the unfamiliar word. No one in the 2 rivers had ever had anything to do with a war. "Why are they having a war?" Fain grinned, and Rand had the feeling he was mocking the villagers' isolation from the world and their ignorance. The peddler leaned forward as if he were about to impart a secret to the mayor, but his whisper was meant to carry, and did. "The standard of the dragon has been raised, and men flock to oppose, and to support." One long gasp left every throat together, and Rand shivered in spite of himself. "The dragon?" someone moaned. "The Dark One's loose in Gildan?" "Not the Dark One," Aral Luhan growled. "The dragon's not the Dark One, and this is a false dragon anyway." "Let's hear what Master Fain has to say," the mayor said. But no one would be quieted that easily. People cried out from every side, men and women shouting over one another. "Just as bad as the Dark One. The dragon broke the world, didn't he? He started it. He caused the time of madness. You know the prophecies. When the dragon is reborn, your worst nightmares will seem like your fondest dreams. He's just another false dragon. He must be." "What difference does that make? You remember the last false dragon? He started a war, too. Thousands died, isn't that right, Fain? He laid siege to Ilion." "It's evil times. No one claiming to be the dragon reborn for 20 years, and now 3 in the last 5 years. Evil times. Look at the weather." Rand exchanged looks with Matt and Perrin. Matt's eyes shone with excitement, but Perrin wore a worried frown. Rand could remember every tale he had heard about the men who named themselves the Dragon Reborn, and if they had all proven themselves false dragons by dying or disappearing without fulfilling any of the prophecies, what they had done was bad enough. Whole nations torn by battle, and cities and towns put to the torch. The dead fell like autumn leaves, and refugees clogged the roads like sheep in a pen. So the peddlers said, and the merchants, and no one in the 2 rivers with any sense doubted it. The world would end, so some said, when the real dragon was born again. "Stop this!" the mayor shouted. "Be quiet! Stop working yourselves to a lather out of your own imaginations. Let Master Fane tell us about this false dragon." The people began to quieten, but Sen Bui refused to be silent. "Is this a false dragon?" the thatcher asked sourly. Master Alvir blinked as if taken by surprise, then snapped, "Don't be an old fool, Sen." But Sen had kindled the crowd again. "He can't be the dragon reborn! Light help us, he can't be! You old fool, Bui! You want bad luck, don't you? Be naming the Dark One next! You're taken by the dragon, Sen Bui, trying to bring us all harm!" Rand and Matt edged into the crowd, getting as close to the wagon as they could. Rand would have stopped halfway, but Matt wriggled through the press, pulling Rand behind him, until they were right behind the council. "I've been thinking you were going to stay out on the farm through the whole festival," Perrin Abara shouted at Rand over the clamor. Half a head shorter than Rand, the curly-haired blacksmith's apprentice was so stocky as to seem a man and a half wide, with arms and shoulders thick enough to rival those of Master Luhan himself. He could easily have pushed through the throng, but that was not his way. He picked his path carefully, offering apologies to people who had only half a mind to notice anything but the peddler. He made the apologies anyway, and tried not to jostle anyone as he worked through the crowd to Rand and Matt. "Imagine it," he said, when he finally reached them. "Beltane and a peddler, both together. I'll bet there really are fireworks." "You don't know a quarter of it," Matt laughed. Perrin eyed him suspiciously, then looked a question at Rand. "It's true," Rand shouted, then gestured at the growing mass of people, all giving voice. "Later. I'll explain later. Later, I said." At that moment, Padan Fane stood up on the wagon seat, and the crowd quieted in an instant. Rand's last words exploded into utter silence, catching the peddler with an arm raised dramatically and his mouth open. Everybody turned to stare at Rand. The bony little man on the wagon, prepared to have everyone hanging on his first words, gave Rand a sharp, searching look. Rand's face reddened, and he wished he were Eowyn's size, so he did not stand out so clearly. His friends shifted uncomfortably, too. It had only been the year before that Fane had taken notice of them for the first time, acknowledging them as men. Fane did not usually have time for anyone too young to buy a good deal of things off his wagon. Rand hoped he had not been relegated to a child again in the peddler's eyes. With a loud harumph, Fane tugged at his heavy cloak. "No, not later," the peddler declaimed, once more throwing up a hand grandly. "I will be telling you now." As he spoke, he made broad gestures, casting his words over the crowd. "You are thinking you have had troubles in the Two Rivers, are you? Well, all the world has troubles, from the Great Blight south to the Sea of Storms, from the Arith Ocean in the west to the Aiel Waste in the east, and even beyond. The winter was harsher than you've ever seen before, cold enough to gel your blood and crack your bones. Ah, winter was cold and harsh everywhere. In the borderlands they be calling your winter spring. But spring does not come, you say. Wolves have killed your sheep. Perhaps wolves have attacked men. Is that the way of it? Well now, spring is late everywhere. There are wolves everywhere, all hungry for any flesh they can sink a tooth into, be it sheep or cow or man. But there are things worse than wolves or winter. There are those who would be glad to have only your little troubles." He paused expectantly. "What could be worse than wolves killing sheep and men?" Sen Bui demanded. Others muttered in support. "Men killing men." The peddler's reply, in portentous tones, brought shocked murmurs that increased as he went on. "It is war, I mean. There is war in Gieldan. War and madness. The snows of the Dallin forest are red with the blood of men. Ravens and the cries of ravens fill the air. Armies march to Gieldan. Nations, great houses and great men send their soldiers to fight." Sen looked around defiantly, trying to stare down the glowers, and raised his voice. "I didn't hear Fane say this was a false dragon, did you? Use your eyes. Where are the crops that should be knee-high or better? Why is it still winter when spring should be here a month?" There were angry shouts for Sen to hold his tongue. "I will not be silent. I've no liking for this talk either, but I won't hide my head under a basket till a Taran ferryman comes to cut my throat. And I won't dangle on Fane's pleasure, not this time. Speak it out plain, Peddler. What have you heard, eh? Is this man a false dragon?" If Fane was perturbed by the news he brought, or the upset he had caused, he gave no sign of it. He merely shrugged and laid his skinny finger alongside his nose. "As to that, now, who can say until it is over and done?" He paused, with one of his secretive grins, running his eyes over the crowd as if imagining how they would react and finding it funny. "I do know," he said, too casually, "that he can wield the one power. The others couldn't, but he can channel. The ground opens beneath his enemy's feet, and strong walls crumble at his shout. Lightning comes when he calls, and strikes where he points. That I've heard, and from men I believe." A stunned silence fell. Rand looked at his friends. Perrin seemed to be seeing things he did not like, but Matt still looked excited. Tam, his face only a little less composed than usual, drew the mayor close. But before he could speak, Ewan Fingar burst out, "He'll go mad and die. In the stories, men who channel the power always go mad, and then waste away and die. Only women can touch it. Doesn't he know that?" He ducked under a cuff from Master Bowie. "Enough of that from you, boy." Sen shook a gnarled fist in Ewan's face. "Show a proper respect, and leave this to your elders. Get away with you." "Hold steady, Sen," Tam growled. "The boy is just curious. There's no need of this foolishness from you." "Act your age," Bran added, "and for once remember you're a member of the council." Sen's wrinkled face grew darker with every word from Tam and the mayor, until it was almost purple. "You know what kind of women he's talking about. Stop frowning at me, Luhan, and you too, Craw. This is a decent village of decent folk, and it's bad enough to have Fane here talking about false dragons using the power without this dragon-possessed fool of a boy bringing Aes Sedai into it. Some things just shouldn't be talked about, and I don't care if you will be letting that fool Gleeman tell any kind of tale he wants. It isn't right or decent." "I never saw or heard or smelled anything that couldn't be talked about," Tam said. But Fane was not finished. "The Aes Sedai are already into it," the peddler spoke up. "A party of them has ridden south from Tar Valon. Since he can wield the power, none but the Aes Sedai can defeat him, for all the battles they fight, or deal with him once he's defeated. If he is defeated." Someone in the crowd moaned aloud, and even Tam and Bran exchanged uneasy frowns. Huddles of villagers clumped together, and some pulled their cloaks tighter around themselves, though the wind had actually lessened. "Of course he'll be defeated," someone shouted. "They're always beaten in the end, false dragons." "He has to be defeated, doesn't he?" "What if he isn't?" Tam had finally managed to speak quietly into the mayor's ear, and Bran, nodding from time to time and ignoring the hubbub around them, waited until he was finished before raising his own voice. "All of you, listen. Be quiet and listen." The shouting died to a murmur again. "This goes beyond mere news from outside. It must be discussed by the village council. Master Fane, if you will join us inside the inn, we have questions to ask." "A good mug of hot mulled wine would not go far amiss with me just now," the peddler replied with a chuckle. He jumped down from the wagon, dusted his hands on his coat, and cheerfully righted his cloak. "Will you be looking after my horses, if you please?" "I want to hear what he has to say." More than one voice was raised in protest. "You can't take him off. My wife sent me to buy pins." That was Whit Conger. He hunched his shoulders at the stares some of the others gave him, but he held his ground. "We've a right to ask questions, too," somebody back in the crowd shouted. "Aye, be silent," the mayor roared, producing a startled hush. "When the council has asked its questions, Master Fane will be back to tell you all his news, and to sell you his pots and pins. You, Tad, stable Master Fane's horses." Tam and Bran moved in on either side of the peddler, and the rest of the council gathered behind them. And the whole cluster swept into the Wine Spring Inn, firmly shutting the door in the faces of those who tried to crowd inside after them. Pounding on the door brought only a single shout from the mayor. "Go home!" People milled around in front of the inn, muttering about what the peddler had said, and what it meant, and what questions the council was asking, and why they should be allowed to listen and ask questions of their own. Some peered in through the front windows of the inn, and a few even questioned Hugh and Tad, though it was far from clear what they were supposed to know. The two stolid stablemen just grunted in reply and went on methodically removing the team's harness. One by one they led Fane's horses away, and when the last was gone, did not return.